So we'll just jump through a couple quick case studies. We did 3 briefly, which we just talked about what went well in them, what could have used improvement, and what were some of the key outcomes. And we're going to look at the good, the great, and the ugly. So the good, there's a construction company, internationally based. What went well in this project is initially they got buy-in from the management. This came right down from the top level. It was appointed to a manager of administration, and it was starting to roll out from there. So they had management buy-in. They recognized that they had a deficiency in the IT area. IT was going to be a problem supporting the system going forward, so it needed to be something that the management team or a dedicated records manager within the organization could administrate the system. And when I say administrate, I'm referring to adding in new document types, modifying workflows, adjusting index values, things like that. They did their due diligence and vendor selection. They initially looked at about 7 or 8 different vendors. Once they came up with what they needed in the software system, they narrowed that down to a short list of 3, and then those vendors had to come in and do specific demonstrations on how this was going to affect their business and how it met the needs of the company. They decided to scan their back file on demand. When they would pull a box out of storage, they may only need 1 file in there, but instead of sending it all back to storage just to have to pull it out again some other time, they would scan the entire box at that time. And they obtained input from all the stakeholders. So again, everyone right from the owner of the company right down to people working with the documents in the field. They got the input and they understood what they were getting into. What could have been improved on with that though? Well, the document classification or the indexing schemes was given very high level consideration at first. It didn't get down to here's the specific index fields that we need for each document type. Here's how they need to interrelate with different documents. That wasn't given really thorough detail. And what happened with that, and one of the key outcomes here, is that it actually delayed the rollout time slightly. It wasn't a deal killer. It didn't take it from a 3-month rollout to an 18-month rollout, but it did delay it a little bit, and it caused some issues with operator acceptance because they're thinking, oh, I'm going to get ready to use this, and now there's delays, or well, we need to search on this field as well. But what it did help them do is improve collaboration throughout this organization. So they have offices in Toronto, London, and Budapest, and Ecuador, and the type of construction that they do quite often is very similar from application to application. So now they're able to quickly share RFP documents, costing sheets, working diagrams, things like that, so that they weren't recreating the wheel every time an RFP came out. They were able to respond to it much faster. They had a unified document system that eliminated duplicate digital copies. And this is a very common issue we see, and it's another reason that people will move towards document management, is that in shared network folders, and everyone has the freedom to name a Word file or a PDF, anything that they see fit. Maybe I prefix it with the date and the customer name, and maybe Stephanie does all her documents different. And so one day Stephanie's out of the office and I have to drill down and find one of her documents, and after an hour of searching her messy network drive, I finally find what I'm looking for, and I say to myself, I'm never going to go searching for that again in my life, so I'm going to make a copy and put it over in my folder and rename it the way I like it. Well, now we have 2 copies. I've just made changes to it, so now we have no versioning control. And this was a huge issue there. They were working with cost sheets, but they weren't sure if it was the latest version. They were using email to send all these documents back and forth, CCing the entire company basically in some of these emails, creating a huge clog in their email service as well as making versioning control just a nightmare. So the ugly. Not every rollout is perfect, and we'll be the first ones to admit that. It does take time, it does take planning. It takes a lot of what we're talking about here today. What went well with this consumer-oriented manufacturing company? Well, they bought the right scanner and handled their daily volumes. That was about it. So what needed improvement? Well, to be blunt, everything. There was no executive buy-in. Basically, this was seen as strictly as a software purchase. IT didn't allow access to any other departments. There was no input from the other departments. There was a misunderstanding of what the business goals and what the business objectives with this software purchase were. There was no ability for remote or out-of-office access to the system, even though that they had 15 offices worldwide, and so on. So what were some of the key outcomes here? Well, the first system they bought didn't work, and 2 months after it was rolled out, it got replaced. big issue there. Over 18 months, it took over 18 months for the new solution to be rolled out because it had to go right back to square one. We had to blow out misconceptions that people had before, and we had to start talking to all the different users. We had to get input from all the different levels, get the executive buy-in, and understand what their business goals were with this system. And why were we able to do it now as opposed to initially? Well, management saw what a mess this first attempt was, so they brought in a new project manager to oversee the project, which gave us access to the areas that we needed to discuss with. The new document management system was deployed, properly configured, and all the employees were finally trained on the software. They're up and running with it now. They love it. It took slightly longer than anticipated, but they are seeing an ROI on it. So even good can come out of bad sometimes. So the great. It's a financial institution, rather large organization that rolled this out as a departmental type solution. And what went really well here is, again, right from day one, buy-in from management. They understood what their business goals were. They understood where the troubles they were having now and what needed to happen. They brought in IT to consult on what was relevant to their departments. So in terms of backup procedures, network integration, things like that. They did diligent planning on their document classification, indexing schemes, metadata, things like that. They knew how they needed to search for these documents. They knew what the different document types were and how they were going to find them down the road. They built a strong business case using input from everybody involved. And they planned for their daily volumes so they could anticipate what their storage requirements were going to be going forward. What needed improvement? Well, a little bit more testing from the IT side would have been ideal. Only issue there being the size of organization they are and the high security nature of what they do. There was some issues with the communication between the server and the software in terms of what their antivirus saw. Wasn't a big deal to overcome. We just needed to test it for an additional 2 weeks, add it to the safe list of their programs, and we were up and running. So easily overcome. So what were the key outcomes? Well, this customer was running on a micrographic system as well. They were filming checks that came in on a daily basis. And if we could imagine what the problems here were, is that on a daily basis, they didn't get enough checks to fill a roll of film. So they would go a week or two before that roll of film was done, and then they would send it into us for processing and inspection. The problem with that, and for people who aren't familiar with the microfilm, is very similar to your old 35mm camera film before digital cameras, is that if there was a problem, if there was a light leak, if it was loaded wrong, that whole roll of film is ruined, but they don't have the original source documents any longer. So in essence, they've just lost 10,000 documents, and they don't know it until 2 weeks later. And again, these are people who invest and spend a lot of money with this organization, and if you were to call them up and say, I need a copy of this check, and they have to go back to the microfilm system, pull it out of the cabinets, put it on their old reader printer, try to make a decent print, all of which took 2 or 3 days as well, wasn't great customer service. It was even worse if they said, that check was on the roll that was ruined and we don't have it anymore. So by replacing that with electronic systems, customer response times were taken from days down to seconds or minutes. So while the customer's on the phone, they can email it to them, they can print off a copy, fax it if need be, or just read off the information they need from the document. The dedicated manager internally was able to administrate it, again talking about adding user rights, adding document types, modifying index fields. Backup was maintained by the IT department. IT was rather taxed in this area, and because it wasn't an enterprise rollout, they didn't want to support it internally. So they found it quite easy that the system was allowed for the managers to administrate it. The regimented indexing structure of the document management system made it so that all employees could find documents, whether they scanned them or another employee did. And the project came in well under budget and produced an ROI much faster than expected. It was about a 6-month ROI on this project. So in summary, some of the key points and we keep harping on throughout the presentation is that there needs to be executive level buy-in on this. You can't be expected to push change management in both directions and be successful the way you need to. The steering committee or the selection committee really needs to have a clear understanding of what the business goals are, not just today, but down the road. Planning makes perfect. Spend the time up front and it'll pay dividends going forward. Consider more than just time savings when you're building your internal business case. And get input from everybody involved. You'll be really surprised to see what input you do get.